right, welcome back. You're still watching Daybreak on this 22nd day of August 2023. My name is Sam Gituko. Let me introduce the panelists here in studio. We have the Senator of Kisii County, that is Senator Richard Onyonka. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning, Sammy.
It's been a couple of weeks I haven't seen you. Welcome back to the show.
Yes.
We have Gishira Kibara, former permanent secretary, but also an advocate and a governance analyst. Good morning.
Good morning, Sam.
Good to see you here.
Thank you.
And then you have the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, Gladys Bose. How are you doing?
Good morning.
You've been missing quite in action.
Yes. I thought I'd take a sabbatical from the media. Now I'm back.
Welcome back, but also congratulations for the latest developments.
Thank you.
All right, and we're still expecting the Member of Parliament for Dagoretti North. She's in the building. She'll be joining us shortly. That is Beatrice Alachi. And we're here to talk about different matters, including the future of devolution. The country just concluded the 8th Devolution Conference in Eldoret last week. A lot of pronouncements were made, but also conversations about how far we've come in the 10 years, the more than 3 trillion shillings that has been allocated to devolution by the national government, but also the close to 4.8 billion shillings worth of budget since 2013 until now. And of course, conversations about the embezzlement of funds, the abuse of office, but also so many other cases, more than 10,000 actually, that TSCC has received reports about what is going on in the counties. And we're here to talk about that alongside other questions of parliamentary oversight of what we've been seeing the cabinet secretaries appearing before the House to respond to questions. We'll be looking at the progress made there. But let me begin with you, Honourable Senator, as you get into the conversation. If you can tell us about your experience. You were in Eldoret, right?
Yes, I was.
Your experience in as far as, especially the questions about utilization of resources in those 10 years. The EACC talking about 10,543 reports. Majority of them, 40% of them, actually being reports of embezzlement of resources. What do you make of this?
I think first it was good that the meeting took place for the obvious reason that publicly Kenyans need to get information as to what is happening in devolution since I think it's 11 years ago. Mm-hmm. Number two, what came out is, of course, there were several responses, several people made presentations. Mm-hmm. Several individuals discussed what they thought had happened from the time when devolution started until now.
Right.
As you say, the most important topic wasn't given much attention, and that is the corruption. Mm. And how I wished that, for example, EACC had made a presentation and even talked about issues with the county governments like pending bills and right. Summary dismissals of employees and workers. Mm-hmm. After the new governors come in. And then, of course, there are legal issues. For example, there is a challenge in terms of the revenue allocation. Mm-hmm. Number one, who handles the money for the county governments?
Right.
County assemblies, up to now, funds are being controlled by the governor or the executive. Mm-hmm. You have, at least the current government has done well in terms of releasing funds to the county governments and basically making sure that the operations at the counties is moving on as agreed upon.
Right.
The other legal issue that I think that came out and that has to be looked at mm-hmm. is that what happens when the Senate when doing the revenue allocation, like we did this time around, we said, let us increase the money to 412 because that's what we felt. Mm-hmm. When you look at the Revenue Allocation Commission, look at the Senate and all the discussions we had taken place, we actually agreed mm-hmm. that we should increase the funds. Now the question becomes, does the Senate have exclusive authority?
Right.
Once we have passed the amount of money that is going to the counties, can the executive reverse that? Mm-hmm. I think this is a legal matter that either we need the Supreme Court to pronounce itself, or at least this is, I think, for me, some of the issues that need to be brought into these discussions that are taking place right now on what are the changes constitutionally that we need.
Right.
But generally, I think it was good business for Eldoret. I think Kenyans saw that Eldoret has grown and changed.
Right.
It is a cleaner city. I was surprised that it was looking very, very good. And I think the public in general was excited and happy. And finally, for me as a member of the opposition, I was happy that the planning team and the coordinating group finally agreed to allow Mzee Raila to make his presentations on Wednesday when President William Ruto made his on Tuesday. So it came out very good, and I hope the next one will even be better.
Okay, I think we mixed up the dates. The president addressed on Wednesday, the former prime minister addressed on Thursday.
Okay, something like that, yeah.
You're right on the intent. But there's a clip I want us to listen to about the president speaking about the future of devolution, especially when it comes to releasing the functions that have been pending at the national government, because he says that a bit of analysis has gone into it and waiting to finalize, especially on the costing of those functions. Let's listen to the president.
That we are going to analyze and frame all the remaining functions that are still being discharged by national government and transfer them to the counties. I am very happy that between the national government and the committee that is responsible for that job and the other stakeholders, we have finally agreed on the functions that should be transferred. An analysis is going on the funding that will accompany the transfer of those functions. And I am told that in the next 60 days, we should be able to transfer all the remaining functions to our counties.
Right, the president speaking about what is pending. Remember, this was one of the promises before the campaigns, but also from his speech at the inauguration at Kasarani. And of course, the Intergovernmental Relations Technical Committee, the chairperson was here last week, Kiragu Kithinji, and was saying that they have actually submitted a report to the institutions that require it, especially the IBEC, and waiting for determination of that. Also to introduce the Member of Parliament for Dagoretti North, Beatrice Elachi. Good morning.
Good morning.
Right, and welcome. You're still talking about the future of devolution. Former PS, let me get to you on this, because yes, the president is saying that the functions have been identified, the costing is going on, but there has been people asking, can devolution handle those functions? Because in fact, some of them, especially to do with roads, these are functions that have been implemented by the agencies that are in law. What would it take to ensure that there's smooth transition, but that the service delivery does not suffer?
Thank you, Sam. I think the starting point is to understand that the Constitution has determined who is to execute particular functions in the 4th schedule. And there was also a requirement in the 6th schedule, particularly Section 15 of the 6th schedule to the Constitution, for those functions to be transferred within a period of 3 years from the time the county assemblies were elected. So what the president is doing is the right thing. That is to commit to transfer all the functions that are due to the counties. Because that's a constitutional imperative. It's not something that the national government or the county governments has a choice over. They are supposed to have been transferred by now. But of course, as you may be aware, the challenge came when we started implementing devolution, in the sense that we adopted what is called a big bang approach, instead of following what the Constitution had provided, and which is still the position under the Constitution, that the functions are not supposed to be transferred until the counties are ready to handle them. But through political agreement in the first summit, it was agreed to transfer all the functions immediately. In hindsight, that was probably also a good political move, in the sense that it prevented resistance from building in the national government to the transfer of the functions to the counties. But what it did is to create a lingering problem, which is still continuing up to now, where counties are entitled to particular functions, but they have not been handed over to them, either in terms of the actual execution, although on paper they have been handed over to them, but they are components of those functions that are still within the national government, being executed by the national government.
Right.
What also the Big Bang did was to preempt the important issue of capacity building. So the issue of capacity building, which is provided for under the Constitution, to be done by the national government, was somehow underplayed. And that continues to be a big challenge even today, because national government in many instances is not very confident that these functions can be properly executed in these county governments. In other cases, it's just pure resistance.
Right.
Then there is also the issue of county governments basically not having deliberately gone out of their way to develop capacity in particular areas, particularly in specialized areas. And that debate between the national and county must take place to agree, for instance, if the functions being carried out by Kura can be effectively carried out within the county governments, or an equivalent of Kura needs to be established in the county governments. So I think it's a critical discussion.
What is the estimate? What is the right thing to happen?
I think the right thing is to transfer the functions, but the process of how that should be done is something that needs to be thought of seriously.
Okay. And Deputy Speaker, of course, it is good to devolve every other function as per the Constitution, but there are ramifications that will have to come with it because, first of all, yes, you devolve the budgets, you send the resources, but also the manpower and the capacity may have to be devolved. It will be very different from Kura overseeing projects across the country, for instance. So how do you do that without necessarily being what you've done so far? Yes, you are devolving, you're sending the resources, but much of it is going to financing the operations. Like you have now, 70% is going to recurrent expenditure.
Yes, I think, I think what my colleague here said is that it's maybe people argue that it's too soon to devolve certain functions. Maybe the counties are not ready. But also, some people say maybe sometimes it's just better to throw them in the deep end and make them swim. Because if you wait, they will not be able to do it. So let them deal with the problem. Let's devolve. Let the crisis happen. They will wake up and they will just get themselves organized. That's how it works. Because no matter how long we wait, because how do you prepare for something that's not with you? So the only way is give it to them.
Right.
Then let them figure it out. And also because we have 47 counties, some counties will do very well. Some counties will do badly. The competition between the counties is what will come out. And we hope that you guys in the media, you can showcase the best performing counties. And then people in the counties can tell their county government, how come this is happening in this county and it's not happening in our county? How come we are doing very well? How come our roads are not moving forward, whereas in the next county, it's moving forward? So I think that competition will also be healthy. So
interesting. And for you, Honorable Elachi, so yes, of course, the resources will go, but what do we do? Again, to ensure that we're not necessarily just going to pay salaries and to finance operations, but people will see the impact in terms of development-wise in those 47 counties.
Thank you, Sam. And as I agree with my colleagues and my speaker, I would say this. 10 years within devolution, how I wish we would have audited first. We audit how each county has performed. And in that auditing, you are able to say whether this county has is able to take over other functions or still needs a lot of capacity, and depending on their uniqueness. Because you find other functions, other counties will still have to call in the national government. You see, even as we devolve, even as we give them, everything is done by the national government's revenue, shareable. I have not seen any county when the government has not devolved the resources that they need or send in the resources that they need functioning. All of them stop and they say, in 2 weeks, we are about to close. So it means it's still the national government that is more relied on in terms of ensuring these counties function. So each function has still a weakness of looking at their own resource and being able to collect the way the de facto county councils used to collect and function. Because those county councils never used to ask money from the national government. They functioned. Now we came and sort of gave in smaller units to function, but you find they're not functioning. Even the ones that remained with more of the local de facto, defunctional facilities, they still do the same. They will say they still don't have capacity, they still need money from the national government. So we need to ask ourselves, because we cannot...
But Honorable Elachi, isn't that the structure? The national government collects the revenue, then shares out with every institution in this country.
But you see, we envisaged that in 3 to 5 years, we will have counties that are able even to give the national government some resources, like before. We envisaged that in the Constitution.
Possible.
Well, it is not possible, or is it? It's possible if indeed the monies we are sending into counties are just taken into the items that they have agreed upon. The worst we have done, and we need to think, which I know we can't, but would be the best. Is it possible for in these 5 years of the president that we can itemize budgets? And when they come in, you understand. You just look at what Treasury has brought in and you know this budget is going this way. And even counties do the same. Itemize your budget, that this will go into health and put it into health. But you see, when they are having worked in counties or being a speaker in a county, what we do, after you give the governor money, instead of the governor now putting it into the line items that he knew that this money was supposed to go. When money is in health, you remove in health, you take it to the governor's office, it will do another something else. It was meant for medicine, and that's how you end up having all these pending bills you hear, pending bills.
And the county assembly is not able to
Well,
oversight.
you see, the county assembly will do everything that is needed. Will oversight, will give. But who has the pass? It's the governor. Then he will come and take the county assembly again and say, I will give you each award fund. Yes, the moment the county assembly hears that, will he talk again about the governor? No, I have my word fund.
Okay, all right. Senator, so those concerns about those pending functions, but also what do we do? Because I don't know what the estimate is in terms of the resources that are supposed to accompany the pending functions.
Yes.
But I would imagine it must be a huge pass. But how do we enforce or empower the oversight capabilities of the assemblies to ensure that, yes, the resources will come, but we are not going to lose everything in the bureaucracy?
Samia, I'll say this because I happen to be very lucky that I sit in the SIPA committee, and I also sit in the devolution committee. And there's something I've just learned, and it's quite amazing. Actually, every single item that my colleagues are discussing here right now has been being discussed, and an audit is being done by the intergovernmental commission that we are having right now. And the reason is very simple. There are certain items which we have red flagged. I'll give you an example. Duplication of services. The national government, with the CDF kitty, is doing an excellent job in releasing money to the members of National Assembly. The problem you have is we actually don't have a structure that could stop you and me if you were an MP and I was a governor and we wanted to do the same road. So in reality, some of the money that is actually being spent is going into wastage. Those are the things that we must begin to look at. It's not that county governments cannot govern themselves, because some of them, you can see there's something going on, and the truth is that county governments and our counties, not even county governments, our counties, some of them have actually done wonderful work. If somebody was to do a general overlap the whole country, looking at the 47 counties, there's a lot of change that is taking place, but the amount of wastage has now been devolved. So I talk about, number one, whether we are looking at what are the items we can red flag, there's duplication. Number two, Madam Elachi has said it very clearly. How are we doing our budgets? In other words, when you have the county government sitting down, discussing and deliberating on what needs to be done, where the money is supposed to be spent and all that. Sami, one of the issues that we have discovered is that giving the ward fund to the county governments, in other words, removing the money from the executive, and that is the governor's office, and taking it directly to the ward, is one of the solutions to the problem of wastage that is taking place in our counties. And the reason for that is that once you create a structure like the CDF, the reason why CDF has been very successful, and my two colleagues sit in the National Assembly, is that the money is sent to the constituency. There is a committee that is waiting for this money. The committee would have sat already. They would have had public hearings. They would have picked the projects they want. The money is allocated with a code. We used to do, my first term in National Assembly, we could actually change, we could reallocate, which went into abuse. So the government came and said, you can't reallocate money. If we say this money, you said you're going to buy a bus, please don't come and tell us you're going to build a classroom again. If that is the case, we will take it back to Treasury, and it takes another 2-3 years for it to come. So members of parliament stopped. The money now directly got, that's why when you look at how CDF has performed, for me it is very clear and obvious. But if you look at our county governments, as my colleagues have again said, the county assembly does not handle its own salaries. The salaries are from exchequer, and that is what the constitution says. The money is actually directly given to the county fund, which the governor is the one who handles that with the CEC finance and the CC. In other words, if you want the county assembly members, those are the MCAs, to oversight the governor, then you must separate the money that the governor handles, whether it is for development or whether it's for recurrent expenditure. That is a different fund, and allow the county assemblies to handle their own money, to allow them have their own salaries, to have their own perks. And I think this is the same thing that has also been raised here. We must agree that in our budgeting, prudence comes in. In our budgeting, the governor can reallocate.
So you want resources for a county assembly to go straight to them from the exchequer? Straight
to the speaker.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Because you have governors, when the MCAs are not quote-unquote behaving, the governors don't release the money.
All right. So, Wakili, there are these concerns being raised. For instance, she says about the revenues haven't necessarily grown. As of March this year, since 2013, the counties collectively collected 335 billion shillings. If you are to look at the wage bill, it had risen from 77 billion shillings in 2013 to nearly 200 billion shillings in the year ended June 2022. So really, more resources being assigned to the counties, the wage bill keeps rising. So how do we protect these extra functions to ensure, yes, you may need more staff, but not to this extent that, I mean, the wage bill has risen by close to 3 times in just 10 years.
I think, again, as I indicated, the challenge was this big bang approach of just handing functions without the proper groundwork being laid, including putting the systems in place. Under the Transition to Devolved Government Act, which had established the Transition Authority, there was very clear criteria, the basis on which the functions could be transferred to the counties. Part of that criteria was adequate legislation being in place. an adequate legal framework, and for the management of that function within the county, including the administrative arrangements needed to be in place before the functions could be transferred. Mm-hmm. Another criteria that was also required was a clear indication how the county itself was decentralizing its own services. And that would have dealt with the issue of the wards, you know, because again, it is also clear that once the counties get authority and resources, they also don't do the further decentralization that's required by the law, because they're supposed themselves to decentralize from the county headquarters to the wards and to the lower units, including the village. So part of the problem remains that there was no adequate costing of functions. Mm-hmm. There was no setting what we call sector standards, which would then indicate when you are wasting funds. Then there was no harmonization of the public service because there was a clear requirement that the public service be harmonized across the two levels of government, so that, for instance, it's possible for specialists to move from one level of government to the other level of government without losing their benefits, without losing their prestige, without losing their, the environment in which they operate. For instance, moving an oncologist from Nairobi, taking him to the village. His children can't find schools. You know, his wife can't get a job, or his husband cannot get a job in that area. Mm-hmm. All that harmonization of how would compensation take place, for instance, to ensure that the counties would access the best specialists available in the country. That has not been done, the harmonization. You remember there was the CAPS report that was done after quite a lot of participatory process, but again, that was not properly implemented. Then you have the...
Just let me cut you short. Yes. You raise a very important point that an oncologist may not find a proper school at the village.
Yes.
In those 10 years, do you think we have done well to make sure that those schools that the oncologist would require are there at a time that, you know, the government is spending close to a third of the budget on education?
Yes. You see, if it was deliberate in the sense that you're saying you are creating the environment for those functions to be performed at the county, then part of what would have been agreed is what were those steps. You see, like, for instance, the way the health function has struggled in the counties. Because from the very beginning, there was need for a lot of work, groundwork to be done before the handing over of those functions. I remember, for instance, because I was involved in the TA, I was a member of the Transition Authority. And of course, being PS Justice, I was involved in the entire legal debate about how that would be done. I remember, for instance, when the first budget, when the county function, health function was transferred to the counties, the first problem was the budget is there, the files are still with the headquarters. How will even the payroll be managed at the county level? Right. And I remember even money being reversed because it has been taken to the counties, but the records of the staff are not there. So how do you even manage the payroll? So the big bank has had very many challenges. And the same would happen even with this if there is no proper analysis. So even the functions that are remaining, they must be carefully transferred to the counties with adequate resources in terms of budgeting, with adequate resources in terms of human resources, with adequate infrastructure and assets that go with the implementation of those functions.
Would that require more hands to be hired at the counties?
Not necessarily. I think the harmonization or rationalization of the public service is where the issue is. Because public service should be efficient both at the national level and at the county level. Okay. And it should be recognized that this entire public service is serving the Republic of Kenya. So you cannot afford wastage in the national level. You cannot afford wastage in the county level.
And do you just do it, devolve, or do you need pieces of legislation?
There will be need for a lot of legislative reform And again, that's the legal framework, which was a prerequisite to transfer of functions to the counties, which again, as I was indicating, has been kind of underplayed.
Okay.
So you find a situation where government basically operates through the law. So it means that everything that the government does must be traced to some law. Mm-hmm. So you have a situation where some of the national agencies in their legislation already are implementing those functions that are supposed to be in the counties. Meaning that if you want to transfer those functions, you must amend that legislation.
Okay.
So that it doesn't give that authority to the agency to execute that county function.
And such legislation, Deputy Speaker, would require concurrence of the two houses. Do you have an estimate of how long that will take? Because the President says in 60 days they'll be ready to transfer. But for legislation, how long would it take to be ready?
No, I mean, legislation, I think it's very time-bound, usually. So you know that it would have to go to a committee, there's first reading, second reading, and that can even be done in 2 days, because you can have the first reading in this session and the second reading in the next session. Then what would take time is the public participation. But remember that the House can reduce the number of days that you need for public participation. So usually if a legislation needs to be fast-tracked, that would happen. I know I had the opportunity to appear before when there was the summit to explain to the governors how we can fast-track some of the county legislation that was in the House. And that can happen as long as, you know, the agency is informed to the House. Then the House will move with speed and can be able to do it. I think the slowness of the legislation has been that sometimes something has to occur for it to prompt legislation. So some of this legislation, I don't think it even occurred to people that they needed to change it. It's one thing for the Constitution to say legislation should be put in place within this period. But it's a what is it called? It's people are just dreaming about it. They're not, they don't know the actual facts. So when the actual facts happen on the ground, that's why having taken 10 years to have the 10 years of devolution has informed us where there are gaps. Because sometimes we didn't see the gaps. So this is a good time to evaluate where the gaps are, where the inconsistencies are, and even this inconsistency, you're saying that about the jobs, the grading. You find that in one county, a doctor who is of a certain level earns more than a doctor in another county of the same level. And that harmonization, this is the time for it to happen. In the beginning, people didn't realize that flexibility that governors had. So if we had a situation like TSC, if you're a teacher, in whichever part of the country you are, you have this qualification, this number of years of experience, this is your grade, and this is your salary.
Right.
We don't have the same for doctors working in the counties or the health workers working in the counties. And it has caused a lot of, dissatisfaction among the doctors. If you remember them, they were demanding to have a health commission, the way you have the Teacher Service Commission, so that it's clear that you're grading, your pay, and then also with teachers, it's clear. If you're in this county, it's a hardship area, you get a certain amount on top of your salary and so on. That is not being done for doctors and health workers generally. So it was not a problem that was apparent at the beginning.
All right. It
has only become apparent upon devolution happening. We've also mentioned the issue of, at the beginning, as Gishira says, the Big Bang approach. You saw when health was devolved, the first thing every governor did was start building a hospital, brick and mortar. But remember, what we devolved is health service. We didn't tell you to go and do construction. So all the governors got involved in a flurry of activity of construction, forgetting that health, all I need is to go to a hospital, find a doctor, be diagnosed, get medicine, and get better. That's really what it is. So the brick and mortar took years. Some counties have been successful. Some counties have not. And I always use the example of Kirinyaga County. Governor Anne Waiguru built a level 4 hospital full with oncology treatment in under 5 years. In Uasin Gishu, we built a hospital which is not complete, 7-story, it is just brick and mortar, and it is still standing there as a white elephant. Ziwa County Hospital. So the question is now, and that is what I call upon Senate. Senate should be going around the country and question the governors. Why is this building standing for 7 years, not functioning? Why is it that another county has built a fully fledged hospital that is like Nairobi Hospital? If you look at what Governor Nanok did in Lodwar, people from Lodwar used to come to Uasin Gishu for treatment. Today, they have an ICU. They have fully fledged, they can do MRI, they can do everything, X-rays and everything over there. So it's very important that Senate, and I think Senator here, tells Senate, stop focusing on the national government. Just focus on the counties. Because you can oversight them better and you know, they can do a better job. Okay,
so, I hear you, Deputy Speaker. We need to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about parliamentary oversight. So stay tuned for that. We're back in a moment.